Welcome to Religion Unmuted, where we explore what religion sounds like with women's voices turned up. I'm Elaine Howard Eklund. I'm a sociologist and director of the Religion and Public Life program at Rice University. In this episode, we want to return to our conversation with Jamillah Karim, Besheer Mohamed, and Laura Olson. We know there are plenty of challenges facing Americans in this moment. And over the months of recording these podcast episodes, we have learned so much from our guests. And that is why we asked each of them to think with you, the listeners, about how we move forward in these times. How does religion inspire and give hope to people in different communities? In this episode, we want to push the conversation to deeper understandings of how religion, race, and gender shape American politics and everyday life. We want to go beyond thinking only in terms of elections. Each of our guests enters this conversation with a unique and important perspective. Jamillah is a public intellectual, a researcher, and a writer. Besheer is a sociologist working in a major polling organization, and Laura is a political scientist working at a major research university. Thanks to all of you for joining us for the second part of our panel on religion, politics, race, and gender. I want to talk specifically about women's rights for a minute. It's been 100 years since women gained the constitutional right to vote. And we know that in both the civil rights movement and the women's suffrage movement, Black women in particular were deeply involved as leaders, and really that they saw racial equality and gender equality as totally inseparable. But it took another 45 years for the Voting Rights Act to be passed. And we don't hear the stories of Black women often enough. How about we start with you, Jamillah? As you think about the communities you were raised in and have studied, what are the stories you wish people knew?
Yeah, I love that you highlighted the women, the Black women who've been a part of the women's rights movement and the civil rights movement from the beginning in the early versions of those movements, women like Ida B. Wells and her anti-lynching campaign. And then from her all the way to the more modern civil rights and women's rights movement, you have women like Rosa Parks and Ella Baker, who are just central to the resistance. And that narrative is so important because I often make the point that the women who joined the Nation of Islam or Black Muslim women, they were the women of the civil rights movement. They were the women of the Black church before they came to Islam. And so they carry that tradition of protest. And Anna Karim, she joined the Nation of Islam after her life was threatened when she was doing voter registration work in Lowndes County, Alabama, and she watched some of her peers die for the struggle. So she decided that she would join the Nation of Islam. And once she became a member of the Nation of Islam, she was a writer in the newspaper, the Mohammed Speaks newspaper. And the Mohammed Speaks newspaper was the official paper of the Nation of Islam, but it really emerged out of the Black press. And the Black press at that time was the only way that one could bring attention to these atrocities against Black people, this violence, this, police brutality, right? Like that was the only medium by which, this could be presented and critiqued and fought against. And contemporary women, one I've already mentioned, Camila Mu'min Rashad, Margaret Aziza of Muslim Arc. Muslim Arc is a group that they do anti-racism work in our communities, and they target a lot of immigrant Muslim and immigrant mosques to do diversity training, basically, and again, anti-racist work. And what you find is that all these organizations, these social justice organizations, they tend to be led by Black women. So those are the stories that I would want people to know about.
Thank you, Jamillah, for amplifying those stories, those important stories. Besheer, Laura, I want to turn to you now. What do you have to add?
Yeah, I think the point that Jamillah makes about the Muslim community and its diversity is one that's well taken, and that the data absolutely bears out. It's an incredibly diverse religious community. And so in a certain sense, the community itself, the Muslim community itself, has to work through a number of these tensions and questions and issues. And in working through, has to find solutions. And solutions, in many cases, may be and should be generalizable, right? And so, there's a sense in which if the Muslim community can figure this stuff out, it can offer a certain sort of template for like, here's how you can work through these things. Here's how you can come together on questions of race when you have, some people that are benefiting from white privilege and some people that are being oppressed by it, but within the same religious community. So there's a certain sort of brotherhood, like, well, we've got to work together, at least in principle. Like we've got this sort of commitment. We're all in this together and we all share these same things, but, you have to recognize these. So I think that there's a way in which the Muslim community certainly can offer solutions as they work them out. I think one thing that I think could be helpful in the broader sense in working through these things is taking seriously the religious commitments of others. And I think it's something that people really struggle with. And I think that people struggle with this regardless of their own religious affiliation, regardless of their political affiliation. There's a certain extent to which people want to say, no, you're doing religion wrong. And I'm going to tell you you're doing religion wrong. And so this finger wagging is going to convince you to do it my way. And that's not going to happen. I mean, that's just not how people work, right? I mean, you have to, in a certain sense, recognize that is a sincerely held belief that you disagree with. And I think that on both the left and the right, some people struggle with that, with like, okay, we disagree on this, but that doesn't mean that you're being cynical or hypocritical or trying to run a game or no, you legitimately may believe, for example, that life begins at conception and abortion is murder. And if you legitimately believe that it's murder, then you're going to take a certain position on this. And me saying, no, you're just doing religion wrong is not a productive way forward.
That's really an important sentiment. I hear what you're saying. We need something more, don't we? Laura, let's now turn to you. Let's hear what you have to add to this.
Another sort of wrinkle in here is that as the U.S. both diversifies even more around religion and becomes a little bit more sort of, I don't want to say it's a secular country because it isn't, right? But as that percentage of religiously unaffiliated folks grows, increasingly, there's probably this sense of threat, right? And fear that happens among particularly white people of faith, especially white evangelicals and traditional Catholics. One thing that's been sort of on the national agenda for about 10 years now, and the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops were the ones who really sort of put this there and pushed on it hard, that this broad notion of religious liberty is something that is somehow under attack by the left, by the Democratic Party, by the ACA, right? If you think about the so-called birth control mandate and the cases around that, right? This sense that, oh, right, this is an affront to religious liberty writ large. And that ends up being a useful mobilizing tool for the Republican Party, at least as it directs itself toward people of faith.
You've all been raising such great points. And if you'll just permit me for a minute, I'm not a theologian, but we've been touching throughout our episodes with you all on two of the world's great faith traditions, Christianity and Islam. And it seems to me like one of the things these traditions hold in common is this emphasis on the community and the good of the other beyond just the good of the self. And I find myself always just asking myself, what's happened here? Why isn't religion being used more to fight against systemic injustices? Jamillah, you mentioned in part one of the panel, the criminal justice system, things like caring for children and caring for the poor. And these, this ethic of care, this deep ethic of care is at the core of these two traditions. And so I guess I want to ask all of you right now a large question. How can we activate that core in the fight for justice?
I'll start.
That's an easy question.
Sorry. And we totally have a survey data answer to that question.
Yes, I know.
It is 37%.
I mean, from my perspective and the work that I do, the talks that I give, mainly to Muslim communities, that inspiring through faith and inspiring people to activism for social justice, that's the only way that you can inspire people to activism and social justice is through faith, right? So when I'm speaking to these communities of faith, I understand that religion is the motivation for them. And so I talk about the beloved community, and that is Dr. King's concept of this community that is both diverse and also fighting injustice. So I call it a community of love and resistance. And the Muslim community is particularly positioned to be the beloved community. And I inspire Muslim communities by telling them that. And in the history of Islam, Prophet Muhammad, when he came, he brought together communities that were very different. He brought together a community of people that were in one place, and then a community migrated to that place. And he had this radical call for brotherhood and sisterhood.
Oh, Jamillah, I love that this radical call for brotherhood and sisterhood. Besheer, this seems kind of abrupt, but why don't you tell us a little bit about what polling data say on this idea of coming together to fight for racial justice?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a few interesting sort of threads there, interesting factors that I think are worth unpacking. One is something that we've seen in our data, and now I'm drawing on data that's a couple years old, so it's in the current, it's in the before time, before COVID, before the protests. It's in the before time. It's a couple years old. And in other contexts, I feel like that's relatively new data, but the world has changed a lot in the last 6 months. But even then, what are some of the things we were seeing? We were seeing that Blacks were more likely than non-Blacks to say that the country had a lot more to do to give Blacks equal rights. This was something that many Blacks were saying in our surveys years ago and had been saying for some time. I'd be interested to see what that looks like today, the extent to which that racial gap has closed. But there was a pretty large racial gap when we've asked that in the past. There's also some interesting religious gaps. Muslims were more likely to say that the country needed to do more to give Blacks equal rights. And some of that has to do with the fact that there's some intersection, that there are Black Muslims, and they're a pretty sizable portion. And so, again, I think there's a different perspective. But the second piece to it, and it's something that I've been reflecting on a fair amount as we've seen the protests, was that Black Americans were also more likely, in our follow-up question, for those who said that the country needed to do more, we asked, do you think the country will make those changes? And Black Americans were more likely to say, no, they don't think the country's going to make the changes. And so that for me was a very powerful finding when we first saw it, that like they're seeing a thing that bothers them. They're seeing what they identify as a problem, and then they're saying, and it's just going to stay that way. And so again, it's a question that I would love to be able to get back into the field and say, how are people feeling in this moment? Is there more optimism? Is there less optimism? Are people thinking that we're going to see these protests and then they're going to burn out? Like, there was this other protest before and then that burned out, and then there was this and that burned out, and we're just tired and we're not even invested in. Or are they saying, no, this is a moment in which we're going to see real change? So that's something that we don't have poll data on, but I would love to see.
Me too. I would love to know too, if data could tell us, is there hope for change? And something else I've been thinking about, as you all have been talking, is that it seems from what I've been hearing from you that people are actually taking their politics more seriously than their religion. I've I've been sitting here, and usually we think of the ways that politics has an impact on religion. And maybe the problem is not that people are taking their politics too seriously. Maybe the idea is that people are not taking their religion seriously enough. I mean, for example, are there pro-choice and pro-life Catholics who could work together on criminal justice reform and anti-racism efforts, for example? I mean, that's the kind of thing that I've been thinking about. I wonder if there's a way that our conversation with you all is actually urging our listeners to take the most authentic pieces of religion more seriously in the way that they actually transcend political divides. Laura, how about you jump in? Can we hear from you first on that?
Absolutely, this idea that people are taking politics more importantly than their religion. There's been some research relatively recently that strongly suggests that people are making decisions about their religious life on the basis of their political points of view. That, oh no, I'm progressive, so I think probably that means I shouldn't be religious. And so there's this couple of pieces going on here. One, there's been this constructivist attempt, I think, on the part for decades now, on the part of white evangelical Protestant leaders to sort of emphasize the theological distinctives. Now, granted, there are pre-existing theological distinctives within Protestantism, and especially so on the evangelical side of things. But to sort of make this argument that we, exactly like Besheer was saying, our way is the right way, any other way is the wrong way, and sort of in a way use politics as a wedge to reinforce that, which has taken a lot of the care and concern, at least on the part of what elites say in the white evangelical Protestant tradition, what they say about justice, what they say about poverty, what they say about caring about the community. And then meanwhile, mainline Protestantism has been in decline for decades, and Catholicism, because it is so diverse, right? There's the abortion-only sort of approach, and then there's the seamless garment of Cardinal Bernardine and of Pope Francis, quite frankly. So it would take, one, the willingness on the part of religious elites or enough pressure from ordinary people of faith beneath them to say we need to come together, right? We can't just create these artificial divisions, for example, within the Catholic Church, of either you're focused on ending abortion or you're focused on this whole other range of issues that are designed around supporting life in all its forms, right? The seamless garment argument. And then to say that, oh, we have way more in common than we have that divides us, and reach out and find ways, right, through interfaith coalitions, et cetera, of finding ways of pulling people in, even those who feel maybe a great deal of discomfort theologically in working with people from other traditions.
That's right. We're sort of, not to put words in your mouth, but it's sort of using religion to build common ground for the common good, isn't it? But I don't want to be Pollyanna-ish here. I know that there are lots of ways that religious organizations and believers actually contribute to sexism and racism, even if they're doing it unintentionally. What do you see? Are there good examples you see actually of, I'm interested in women specifically, women helping to foster change, maybe women who are religious in particular, actually helping to foster change?
This whole impetus among women religious in the Catholic Church, so many of them are deeply progressive, and many of them are very sort of activist minded, and Pope Francis's papacy has been more accepting of that, but Benedict's very definitely was not, and even John Paul II, not so much, right? Pope Francis has been lifting up the idea of women taking more direct and profound roles in not only the church, but also being more accepting of women religious in different national contexts, including ours, that want to be engaged in justice. And now, there aren't a lot of women religious in this country, right? Nuns, there aren't that many, but those who are out there, a lot of them are they would be, I think, many of them very eager to line up and say, yes, let's go to work on social justice issues.
Yeah, those are excellent points that you make. And you're all experts on public religion in some way or another. And I think we're talking about, what does good public religion look like, authentic public religion? And instead we get a pretty narrow view of that, don't we?
Mm-hmm. And in a way that was not the case 70 years ago, right? When we think about when the civil rights movement was first born, that obviously everyone knows, or everyone should know, that that was driven by African American churches and clergy, and frankly, church women, like we've talked about before. And they were joined, right, in this fight for justice by so many people of faith from other traditions and of other racial and ethnic backgrounds, etc. And that when I tell my students that this idea that religion plus politics equals conservatism doesn't have to be, they sort of look at me, really? Because it becomes so much this assumption, right? This basic foundational assumption in our culture these days that you can't do one without the other, right? That you can't do religion plus politics and have that go in a different direction, because those voices have been so suppressed for so long now.
I would add, and to answer the question about a woman who's fighting sexism, when I think about a Muslim figure who has really taken on this cause, especially in terms of electoral politics, that would be Linda Sarsour. And I think that she would be the figure, male or female. And in particular, I was paying attention to her work in Louisville right now, and going there with Tamika Mallory. So Tamika Mallory is an African-American woman who also an organizer of the Women's March. And
Jamillah, I hope it's okay if I interrupt you just for a second, just to get all of our listeners on the same page. Linda Sarsour, of course, and Tamika Mallory are extremely well-known political activists who've won honors like being named Time Magazine's 100 People of the Year. Linda Sarsour is a Muslim, and Tamika Mallory has been influenced by the Black church tradition.
I actually saw Tamika Mallory speaking after the murder of George Floyd, and I didn't know who she was at that time. But all I thought was, wow, she is passionate, she's fiery, she's eloquent. And so then later on, I see her connection, with the Women's March and her connection with Linda Sarsour, and just very happy to see that connection. I was actually showing the video to my husband, the speech that I mentioned. And I said to him, this is our gift. This is the gift that comes out of our struggle. I said, I'll say what I said. I said, do you hear a white woman speak like this? Maybe I said a white person, but I was like, this comes out of our struggle. And it's so beautiful just, again, to see someone like Linda Sarsour, who's representing Muslim women, to be connected to the Black tradition in that way, and to honor it, and to honor Black women. Like Besheer was saying, like, Black people don't really expect anything to change, but still, when these verdicts actually come out, like, there's this deep pain and sorrow, and being in the midst of that. And I thought that it's so important that Linda Sarsour is in that space. Like, she could only be a spokesperson and only really fight for us or with us as Black women if she's really with us, right? And she's really there to see and feel our pain. So, it was just a moment of really seeing how we have to act out this solidarity, that we have to really be together. We have to really feel each other's pain, feel our hearts. And religion, that is the domain of religion, right? That religion has that potential and power to bring us together.
And so that's where we ended the second part of our panel interview, on an unusually hopeful note. that religion doesn't have to be a dividing force, that people can come together across differences. When the panel was first conceived, it was supposed to be in person, actually in my home, where I could provide the kind of hospitality that our guests and their ideas deserve. But as we all know, 2020, it just hasn't gone according to plan for anyone. And so we end on a grateful note, grateful to our guests who joined us multiple times from their homes in the midst of their own deep challenges. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to check out part 1, Gearing Up for Tuesday, wherever you listen. You'll also find our earlier episodes when we talk to each of these guests one-on-one. You can hear Jamillah's ideas on radical love and get Besheer's and Laura's insights on the big picture of religion and politics. And make sure to subscribe to Religion Unmuted so you don't miss future episodes. Thanks again to our guests, Jamillah Karim, Laura Olson, and Besheer Mohamed. Today's show was written by Pamela Prickett, Rachel Schneider, and Haley Hemstreet. Our producers are Three Wire Creative and Daisha Clay. We had support from the Henry Luce Foundation. I'm Elaine Howard Eklund. Until next time.